Welcome to episode 17 of Traveling Science. G'day legends, welcome back to Traveling Science, the podcast that's sharing science with the world. My name's Crowe and I'm the Traveling Scientist, coming to you today from my home in Aireys Inlet, Australia. I'm a health science communicator, and on this podcast, we interview doctors, researchers, and experts, hearing their stories and sharing their ideas that can help us to live smarter, happier, and healthier lives. This week's guest is Victoria Lynne Carrier, a suicide prevention practitioner working for NEAMI National in the LifeConnect program. Victoria's work focuses on community outreach, training people to understand suicide and be better prepared to help people who might be struggling with mental health and suicidality. So, big disclaimer here that this episode of the podcast does talk about some serious issues like depression and suicide, which can affect all of us in some way. And there is plenty of valuable information shared throughout our discussion. But if you think you might find this topic confronting or triggering, you can call Lifeline or your local suicide hotline from anywhere in the world, and they will help you through this difficult time. But don't stress, because Victoria is an incredible and energetic human being who makes this conversation super fun and funny, a little bit emotional at times. I think we both cried at one point during this conversation. But that's because this information is so important and honest, and it's really a discussion that we all need to be involved in. During our discussion, Vic answers questions like why mental health issues are becoming more common, how to prevent doom scrolling, what is lived experience, how to stop ruminating on negative thoughts, how to talk to people about suicide, and what to do during a crisis moment. And we also discuss things like mental health, suicidality, self-care, open-mindedness, well-being, 5-4-3-2-1 mindfulness, peer groups, Lifeline, and prevention versus postvention. And also, this was an in-person interview, so if you check out the Traveling Scientist YouTube channel, you can watch the video and see us sitting on Victoria's couch with her gorgeous puppy Charlotte, who sat between us and got pats throughout the entire interview. So let's get straight into it. Here is this week's conversation all about suicide prevention with the one, the only, Victoria Lynne Carrier. Victoria Lynne Carrier, welcome to Traveling Science.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time. You and your lovely puppy Charlotte.
I know. She's feeling very dramatic, very like painting like one of your French girls right now. So I love that. But she's going to probably stay here.
That's cool. She can hang out. For anyone listening, you can see Charlotte, the doggo, sitting here next to us on the YouTube video, or you can just listen.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's get straight into it. Can you please tell us about your job? What do you do?
Yeah, good question. My official title is quite long. It's a suicide practitioner or suicide prevention practitioner or lived experience practitioner. And normally when I say like I work in suicide prevention, most people think that I work more in like crisis or like that one-on-one. But talking
people down off ledges.
Yeah, and so which it's not like we don't work with because we'll get into this for sure, but you know, suicide affects everyone. So you know, often there seems to be this little disconnect of like, oh, you work with these people. But I work with everyone, and everyone can be affected by suicide. So technically, yes, I am working every day with people who are at risk. But my job is like, as a team, we help build capacity and understanding of suicide, what suicidality is. We try to connect people who have been bereaved by suicide into our bereavement program. And we really have this mentality of we're helping people help others. So it's almost like there's this thing called train the trainer. Right. So essentially that's almost us. So we're coming in and we're helping people so that they feel more comfortable in their communities and their workplaces to have the suicide conversation. So we're really like breaking apart stigma. We're really talking about, what do I do when someone says they're feeling suicidal? Like that's the work that we primarily do. And on top of that, we do like resilience workshops. We do a mindfulness program, which is one of my favorite parts of it. Mm-hmm. So lots of different stuff. We wear a lot of hats because a lot of just well-being in general is suicide prevention. So
NEAMI's LifeConnect provides suicide prevention training for community groups and workplaces at no cost. And the training aims to increase participants' skills and confidence in having conversations about mental health, as well as recognizing and responding to the risk of suicide in communities and workplaces. And the content covered in their workshops is based on the latest research in suicide prevention and informed by lived experience. But now let's get specific. What does Victoria actually do?
So a good example of this is we worked with this wonderful group. They're out of a hospital in Melbourne, and they are the sexual assault group that you'd go to if you have been sexually assaulted and you need to go to someone. So we worked with them. We went into a workshop with them. It was about 2 hours long, is me and my other colleague. This one is a little bit more of a free-form workshop that we did with them. And essentially, they want to get more confident with like risk assessment, with how to have like ask the question. One of the main things, we work a lot with clinicians in this space because there's actually no like formal training, which is like, it blows my mind that there's not like this very specific training on how to talk to people about suicide. And I've had conversations with like GPs, nurses, like paramedics who are often like the first people to respond. And they're like, we have maybe like a week chapter on like suicide, like risk assessment. And it's so cold and so clinical. And so we're bridging that gap for a lot of services because they don't have that. So we go in and we try and make them feel comfortable with having this conversation. So often people say, I don't want to break rapport with someone. So, you know, you're working with somebody and you feel like, you know, you want to ask the question, but they're like, I don't want, you know, there's a lot of fear that sits in the room. They're like, I don't want them to think that I think they're weak, or I don't want them to think that I'm putting words in their mouth. But what we know, and like one of the biggest things that we preach in the work, is that asking directly about suicide is the most protective thing that you can do with someone, and sometimes the scariest. And then we also try and bridge this gap for a lot of people in the mental health world, because sometimes you can get stuck in thinking like, I'm going to help my clients with this. I'm going to do really well. I can ask my clients this. But when you go home, you still have people you love, you have family members, you have yourself, who all can be affected and have suicidality. And so it's often quite hard, and even on a personal level, to ask your friends and family, you know, are you thinking of suicide, or have you had thoughts of this? That's just like a whole new ball game. And so we help people feel more comfortable with that as well.
Awesome. It sounds like you're really trying to develop those conversations that are super important. And I know like doctors and nurses and paramedics, things like that, they have so much they need to focus on, so much, such a broad variety of knowledge that they must have that, I can imagine suicidal conversations must just be like such a tiny little aspect, because there is just so much they need to know. And so it's really important that it sounds like you guys are actually focusing specifically on this area, which is incredible, because mental health is just becoming more and more of a prominent issue in today's culture. I wonder if you have any thoughts about why mental health is seemingly such a big issue with so many people. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Fair, big question. But I think there's always, like, mental health is so interesting as a word because we all have mental health, like we all have physical health. And there's always kind of this divide, like, where it's quite easy to talk to people like, oh, I hurt my back recently. I went to the gym with my friend and she like lifts quite heavy. She's a strong girl. And I was like, me too. And then I like busted my back. And this whole week I've been like telling everyone who can listen, I'm like, my back hurts. I had to go to the physio. But like easy, right? We can easily say I threw my back out. But we have such stigma around saying, you know, I've been going through a really hard time lately, or I have depression, anxiety, or, you know, all these other things. Like, as a society, it's so stigmatizing to have anything going wrong with your mental health. And I argue that that's just part of being a human. So I think a lot of our job is like trying to humanize that, like, we all have different experiences, as in everyone's going to experience a cold, right? At some point, and we're like, yeah, that's fine, that happens. Like, everyone's going to experience deep levels of despair and sadness. And I think because of the way our society is set up, where we're not allowed to talk about it, we have to keep it in, that has actually created most of the issues here, is that if people were allowed to express their emotions and feel through them, then they wouldn't be, you know, holding them in. It wouldn't be so taboo. And that's where a lot of the issues come from, is that stigma of just being able to talk about your emotions. So I think when we kind of think about like, you know, mental health, you know, being such a big thing now, is because people are finally able to talk about it more. So I think it's always been there. Also, like at the end of the day, like our housing crisis, our rent crisis, the climate change, like politics, war, like
there's a lot to be concerned about.
Yeah. And like with social media, it's like constantly at us. So we kind of feel helpless and we feel like a bit of what's the point. And I think that's a huge factor in it.
Negative news just seems to spread it spreads more than positive news. So I feel like there's a lot of good happening out there in the world, but people just aren't talking about it. It's not on the news, it's not on social media, because it's so much easier to complain about everything that's going wrong, and like fear mongering is so big. So I think that can be an issue, and responding to that, I think it's important to not despair and not give up hope. Like, it's so easy to do, and maybe just think, hey, I'm going to turn the news off, I'm going to get off social media and go hang out with my friends, and realize that,
yeah, I think that's a huge one. Is like doom scrolling is such a big thing right now.
Doom scrolling, or doom surfing, is the act of spending an excessive amount of time consuming negative content online. You know, stuff about the war or natural disasters, climate change, or like anything related to Donald Trump. And in 2019, a study by the National Academy of Sciences proved that doom scrolling is linked to a decline in mental and physical health. Solution: if your phone is making you feel bad about something, stop scrolling. Put your phone down and go outside. Unless it's raining, then, I don't know, phone a friend.
Negative news does spread, and we talk about it because it's interesting. I recently started following this girl who constantly brings up good climate news, and she's like, here's the good climate news for the week. And like, that's been super helpful, because I found myself really spiraling with the climate crisis. I'm like, well, what's the point? Like, and so just kind of, I think, you create the reality you live in. Easier said than done, though. So all of these like tips and tricks, if I give, like, easier said than done. But I know for myself, like in the last 2 years, like I really struggled with so much, like in the job that I was working with, you know, like, yes, it's beautiful and there's so many amazing things, but I see a lot of sadness and despair, and sometimes I feel hopeless with that. And then I also, as a lived experience like worker, I have my own experience at suicidality, which creeps up, and that's totally fine and very normal. And I found for myself, like, really focusing on the reality I create in my everyday. So, you know, I don't scroll in the morning. So like, I get up, I sit literally here, and I have my book, and I read my book, and I have Charlotte, and I have the sunlight come in, and I do that every morning instead of scrolling. And that's honestly been a huge help. And then I start work. And so I've started work and my day without, like, you know, what everybody else is doing or comparing myself. And another thing, like, my partner and I do has been really helpful kind of for this, is like, we don't have phones like in the room. So like at night, like, our phones are away. So we're not sitting next to each other, like, scrolling away. And that's been really helpful.
I actually started doing this since I spoke with Victoria, and it feels good. Trust me. Put your phone charger and your phone somewhere outside of your bedroom, so that when you're in bed, which should be a sacred space for sleeping, getting it on, and maybe building a pillow fort, you aren't tempted to check your phone because it's in another room. Just try it out. It feels very liberating.
One of the cutest things I do
please.
that I'm obsessed with is this mindful walking group. And it was in Ringwood, and it was primarily with 65 plus community, which is my favorite community to work with, because sometimes they're often left out of the conversation, and we know that they have the highest rates of suicide.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and it's like not a known thing, because in our Western society, we kind of forget about the older generation. We're like, oh, like, you know, they're gonna die anyway soon. But like, no, they've got years left, and they've got heaps of change to be had. I think people often think like, well, they have their ideas and they won't change. And I just don't believe that at all. And so with this group, it's a 6-week program. they come to walk around the lake with me, and we talk about mindfulness, and I run them through different activities and like breathing. And at first they come and they're like, who is this? Like this child speaking to me about well-being. And I try and just make it as relatable as possible. So it's being in the present moment, and I break it down for them, and we talk about very specific examples in their life. And by the end of the 6 weeks, like, it's so cool. I bond so hard with them, and they are, for a lot of them, they're like, this is the first time I've ever even been able to focus on my mental health. Like, a lot of their generation is, they kind of, especially women, were like, everything they did was for the family. And so this is the first time in their life where they're like, I'm doing something for me. And it's so beautiful and really cool. And I loved that program. And I just like love the 65 plus people because they're so cute and funny.
I bet.
Yeah.
I want to take it back a little bit. You mentioned a couple of tips and tricks, which I really love. Things like, wake up in the morning, not going on your phone, so reading a book and sitting in the sunshine, not having phones in the room. Do you have any other little tips and tricks that can help with mental health? You were talking about, I guess those are some really good daily rituals, I suppose. Do you have any other sort of rituals or advice you might give to someone who is struggling with, say, doom scrolling or just generally not feeling great about the current state of things?
Yeah, I think it's one of those, often people come to our workshops and they almost expect or really want us to hand them like a checklist of like, this is how you prevent suicide. This is how you help somebody out of it. Yeah. And we're like, we're not going to give you that. There is no magic wand. There's no
one size fits all thing.
At all, because everyone's so different and unique. And so what we really try and promote is like empathy, genuineness, transparency, and it's checking in with your mates. And like, Are You Okay Day is cool and all, but I hate the message of like one day a year you ask your mates if you're okay. Yeah. I think normalizing asking your friends early, like we do a lot of early suicide prevention work before people might even be thinking of suicide, is when we want to, as a society, as a community, engage and have conversations and say, like, recently I had a friend who lost their dad. And I asked him, I was like, hey, what are you doing for your self-care? Because like, as we were talking, he was talking about the family, he was talking about the funeral was happening, and he was, just kept going on and on about what everyone else is doing. And I was like, well, what are you doing right now? And he was like, oh my God, no one's asked me that. And I was like, do you want me to rattle some ideas? Do you want to rattle some ideas off of me? And then he was like, yeah, well, I feel like I want to go and walk on the beach today. And I was like, okay. So it's kind of like helping people hold themselves accountable to self-care. Yeah. So being like, what are you going to do today? What makes you feel genuinely good? A lot of like, what's a coping mechanism and what's something that's genuinely restoring you is a cool conversation you can have with your friends and with yourself. Are you binge watching TV because you want to escape? Valid, fair. Yeah. Do you feel good after? Yeah. Not most of the time. And I think there's time and place for coping mechanisms. I think they can keep you alive for a while. And I think there's also a way to start to gently challenge yourself at times to be like, okay, I'm going to shut that off and I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to go journal. Maybe I'll go and finally book that therapist appointment or do art therapy. And like, I think it's getting creative is like my biggest, like, be creative with your well-being journey. Love that. Because it's not going to be, not everybody is going to vibe with a therapist, or, 9 times out of 10 you go into your GP's office and it's like, they got about 10 minutes for you, like they're barely listening. So that puts people off as well, that whole clinical model. So is there a peer group around you? Are there just fellow peers who have gone through struggles as well and you want to talk to them? Is there art, is it music? Is it pets? Like, finding that kind of stuff that will kind of pull you out of those coping mechanisms and into something that's restorative can be really helpful.
I didn't even know that this was a thing, but peer groups are communities of people that are going through similar struggles and working through it together. Whether you're struggling with depression or suicide or addiction or anything at all, try searching for a peer group in your local area and you will likely find help and support. It's that easy. And now let's talk about self-care. Absolutely. I think self-care is a word you mentioned a couple of times. I think that's super important. Something that a lot of people don't often think about. It's easy to forget about. So just taking a moment to have that discussion with yourself about what is restorative for you, what's going to help you, is super important. And another one that you mentioned a couple of times is discussion. So opening the discussion, whether it is with your GP or with a therapist or just with friends, talking to friends about how are they doing and how are you doing, because one day a year is not enough.
Yeah.
It's just a nice reminder, but it should be regular throughout our lives and through society.
100%. And the more normalized we make that, the easier it is, right? Like the thing with suicide is with something that we often talk about is, you know, if you have two people and one person is so scared to ask their friend or their client or whatever about suicide because they're like, what if I put the idea in their head? What if I make it worse? What if that's not what they're thinking and now they're going to hate me for asking? And these are all very normal things. And then you think about the flip side, the other person's like, well, I'm not going to tell somebody because A, I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to think, you know, I don't want them to think I'm selfish or weak or, you know, there's so much stigma everywhere in the room that if you can be someone to try and cut through that and just say, hey, I want to ask you, you know, how you're going. Often, sometimes when people are going through your situation, they do think of suicide. Have you thought of that? And what you're saying to the person is like, I'm not going to shy away from this conversation. And I think the next part is most scary for people because they're like, well, what if the person says, yeah? Like, what if I do when like my friend or client says, yeah, I am feeling that way? That seems like the most scariest bit for most people, and that kind of stops people from asking. And we always say, like, after if somebody says, yeah, like one of the biggest things that I think we do as a society is that righting reflex. So we want to fix someone's suicidality. We want to take it away from them. We want to solve their problem. So sometimes people will come to us and they can be any sort of mental health problem or any sort of genuine challenge in life. And you kind of come in with advice. You're like, oh, okay, yeah, you could do this, this, and this. You know, we do that because we love people. We don't want to see them in pain. But what is actually helpful, because I don't know if you've ever gotten unsolicited advice, but it's literally the worst feeling. You're like, I didn't ask you.
Totally.
I'm just telling you this thing. So, you know, what people genuinely want is to be heard and listened to, and that's it. And you can say that. You can say, I don't have an answer right now. I'm not going to take your suicidality away. I'm not going to be able to fix this problem, but I'm here for you. I'm here with you. You know, we can like walk alongside each other, like, and that's all I want to do with you. Yeah,
I think that's really, that can make someone a hero, to actually just be able to be open to having that conversation and not trying to come in with all the solutions, just being there for someone. You mentioned a couple of times that your job is lived experience. Do you want to explain what that means and also how you sort of stumbled into this job?
So lived experience is quite a big umbrella term, and I often feel like ridiculously privileged to be in this space now, because like 10, 20 years ago, when people were fighting for lived experience to have a voice, it was like impossible because there's this model of like clinicians know best, doctors know best. You need to study for 10 years or 5 years from a book. And what we really are recognizing, and the growth of this movement now, is that lived experience. Like, you've lived through this, you've made it somewhere out in some way, because there's no such thing as, you know, being recovered, but you're on a journey where you're feeling a bit more maybe removed from that, or like on a healing journey, and you're able to express your experience to someone else and hopefully help them through that. So it's funny, I stumbled along the job in a really funny way because I was managing this cafe and I had been in hospitality since I was like 14. And also being American, like the hospitality industry is like terrifying and exhausting, and I just like cried every day.
It'd be super stressful position.
And so I was working at this cafe in Melbourne, and there was like one day where I just like had it and I like quit in a frenzy, and I was like sobbing, and I was like, I don't do this anymore. And so on that day I was like, I want to work in mental health. Like, I want to do this. I feel like I've lived through so many different things in my life, and I feel like I've been working so hard on myself, and I thought I was like, I kind of like manifested it in some way. And I was like, I want to have a job where I can use my own lived experience. I didn't even know lived experience really existed at this point, like as a job. And I was like, I want a job where I can use my lived experience to like help others, because I've done so much work on myself. It's got to be worth something, right? And so I was like Googling, and I was like, okay. And then I was like, I think I need another diploma, because I had gone to school for theater and economics back in the States. I wanted to be an actor on Broadway. And I think that those skills have really helped me as well in my life and in this job. So I was like, I really want to study something. And so I started this diploma program in counseling.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, I'll start here. This is a good starting point. And then I was like on all of like the job searches, and I found this job with NEAMI, and it was like a peer support worker. And it was like peer work. And I was like, what's peer work? I started looking into it, and it looked really cool. It was like using all your knowledge. So your study, your lived experience, you as a human, to go and do one-on-one kind of mentoring, coaching, well-being sessions with other humans who are going through something. I was like, great. So on the phone with this person, and we had a really lovely interview. And then the callback interview, or like to tell me if I had the job or not, he was like, I'm not going to give you the job. And I was like, okay. And he's like, but I'm going to pass you to my friend who works in the same company.
Yeah.
He runs the suicide prevention team. I think you'd be perfect for it. Okay. And I was like, I didn't think about working specifically in suicide prevention. It's a part of my life that I've experienced through helping family members through attempts and suicidality, and then my own suicidality. And I was like, okay. And so he handed me to my manager now, and we had like the most brilliant conversation. We were like, yes, like it just felt so good. And I was like, this is the coolest man I ever met. Yeah. He's amazing. And he was like, you're amazing. And I got the job, and I was like, what? And my partner came home, and he's like, did you get the job? I was like, I got a job.
It's a little different to what I expected.
Yeah.
But it sounds like you just vibed really hard over the phone, and you're like, this is it. This happened.
And it couldn't have been this is the most perfect job I've ever, I feel really lucky because I know that to wake up every morning and to love your job is sometimes rare. And I've had that for the last almost 2 years, and it's been the coolest thing ever. I love my team. I love my job so much. So
yeah, that's incredible. And the fact you could definitely argue that you're just saving lives, but just having those conversations and developing the discussion that needs to happen with so many people and all these workshops that you do, it sounds awesome.
Yeah.
So, good on you.
Thank you. And I think what people often reflect back after these workshops, we do a week, maybe we do 5 or 6 workshops. And so we're touching so many different community groups and mental health clinicians, and they can be from all aspects, right? We talk to so many different people. And one of the most common things that they come back is they're like, yeah, I've done suicide prevention training. It was boring. It was dry. I didn't learn much from it. It kind of was just if somebody is having this risk, call 911. Sorry, not 911, 000.
Yeah.
And that's what most people hear. And what we try and say is don't call 000 right away. Yeah. Sit with this person, talk to them as a human, say I see what you're going through right now. What can we do? That's kind of our biggest challenge, that we're challenging people to do is don't just put them in the emergency room, because there are so many endless stories of people going to the emergency room, after or before a suicide attempt, and it being the most devastating thing that's ever happened to them, because it's just not a space for them. They're treated so poorly. There's so much stigma around it. So how can we sit longer in the pain with someone? How can we just listen? How can we try and de-escalate ourselves? And then most people are like, I can't do that. And we're like, yes, you can. Yeah. But we often get said or told that the difference between our program and so many others is the lived experience lens. So every single person in my team is a lived experience worker. Okay. And we all come from different lived experience. So, some being bereaved by suicide, some of my colleagues coming in with their own suicidality and attempts. Or for me, I come in with, my experience caring for people in my family who've had attempts, and just general, struggle with mental health as well. And then my own suicidality, which is quite interesting sometimes because mine really came up at a time where I was technically doing really well. And that's a big misconception where people always think if you're thinking of suicide, it's when you're rock bottom and everything's wrong. It's got to be that way, right? Or you've got depression. That's the only time. Yeah. But it's so normal, and way more people I argue that almost everyone in the world at one point has had the thought of suicide. And people are like, oh, no, not me. And I'm like, have you ever thought, I just don't want to do this anymore. I can't even fathom paying taxes again. I can't even fathom going to work every day. Yeah. These feelings of I don't want to live in my body or my skin anymore. I hate my body. Those types of feelings all jumbled up are almost the same feelings.
Super common.
So common. But we have such a stigma when the word suicide comes up. Oh, that's not me.
Yeah.
And so I feel so proud to be able to talk about my own experience of, when I had my dog and my cute little, we haven't bought, but like this cute little house in Brunswick, my lovely partner, and I have a great friend group, and I love my job. That's when my suicidality started to come up, because it just felt like I can't do this anymore, as far as like, I'm so scared this will go away. Yeah. And that kind of fear was so crippling. It's like, I don't want this good stuff to go away, because my life sucked before and now it's kind of good, and now I'm terrified it's going to suck again. Yeah. And so those are normal feelings too, but we don't talk about those as much, because it makes you feel weak or stupid or something.
And I think being able to use your stories through your work and the lived experience would just make it so much more relatable, and really helps you to be on the same level with people you're talking with, and to actually have an impact, as opposed to someone looking from the outside who's maybe studied this for 5 or 6 years at university. Sure, they know a lot, but have they lived it? I don't know.
And do they know people? That's always my question, because I think my sweet spot is what I think is the best, is having all of that knowledge and having lived experience, or at least just when you've gone to school for a long time, because I think it's amazing, and like I still want to further my education. I'm keep going with that, but can you lead with compassion and empathy? So you can have all the knowledge, you can go to school, you don't have to experience suicidality to have compassion towards someone. And we've missed that somewhere with a lot of clinicians, where it's like that stoic of like, okay, this person's going through this, like, I can't be attached or anything like that.
Here's a prescription.
Yeah, right? Here, drugs. Like, here, do anything else. I'm going to refer you because this is too much. Yeah. Can we lead with compassion and empathy, that this is a human and another human, and one human just happened to read more books and do some more tests, and the other human is just surviving? Like, why is there such a divide and such like a hierarchy?
Does anyone inspire you? Do you have anyone living or otherwise that inspires you to do the work that you do?
Yeah, I think that answer is twofold. I think I have one person that really inspires me to do this work, and that is my sister, who I love so much. Oh my God, it gets me a little bit emotional. I just think that she's just one of the most amazing humans, actually, both my sisters are incredible human beings, and they both inspire me a lot to do this job, because we all went through a very similar traumatic childhood experience, and we've all come out very differently, and it really inspires me to figure that out for all of us. Like, I really want all of us to heal so much, and since we're so different, how can I figure out new ways so it's not just my healing but theirs? And it's a big driver for me, for sure.
What are your sisters' names?
Oh yeah, so my sisters are Carissa and Stephanie, and I'm the youngest of them. So they both live in the States still, one in Boston and one in California. So we're all still decently close, especially for being so far away. We talk like every week, if not multiple times a week. Yeah. And it's been, I just adore them.
Shout out to Carissa and Stephanie. You both have an incredible sister who is saving lives over here in Australia, and she's inspired by both of you. But wait, there's somebody else who also inspires Victoria.
And then my grandpa. So my grandpa is the coolest person alive. He looks like the man from Up. He's got like that real square jaw, and he's like, Tonesy. And he's got such a Boston accent. He's like, Tonesy, how you going? I'm like, how's Melbourne? Well, he says Melbourne. And I just think the way in which he has lived his life is so incredible. And he was in the Navy, and he is like, he had his 80th like a couple years ago, and there was like 300 people at this party. Wow. Like his reach, like he should have been mayor. Like he has touched so many hearts by just being his caring, authentic self. And he also inspires me because he, being of the older generation, has an open mind. So like when me and my sister, like long ago, we were going to like the Women's March in Boston. And he was like, I don't know why you go to this march. Women have more rights nowadays than they did before. And I was like, excuse me, how do you think they got those rights? And he was like, He's like, well, I guess they marched for them, they fought for them. And I was like, okay. And then we went through, and he just like dropped that defense, and he immediately was like, great points. Yeah. That's so right. And like, like where I think a lot of people talk about their grandparents and they just stick to that. They would just stick to that and be like, I don't know why you're doing this. But he's like, no, more information. How, and I love that about him. And like when I got my first tattoo, he was like, what? And now he's like, oh, I love them. Like he's constantly evolving, and he's showing me that age is just a number, and he's still hanging out with his friends and doing all these great things, and I love it.
Oh, your grandpa's awesome.
He's so cool. I love him so much.
Another thing I was hoping to ask you is if you had any recommendations, either like a book or maybe a movie, if there was any sort of inspirational content out there that you might recommend for people who are associated with any sort of mental health issues or suicidality.
Yeah. I think one of my go-tos would 100% be Gareth Edwards.
Okay.
And he has this wonderful book called The Procrastinator's Guide to Killing Yourself, which is like obviously an intense name. It is a tough read in a sense, but I think what he does is he really opens up this idea and like contextualizes what suicidality is for him. And I think everyone could learn a lot from that because it takes you into that world. And he talks a lot about how he's put off, you know, so many times, and that's what's kept him alive. Yeah. And he's just an incredible writer and so brilliant and really hopeful as well. And I love him. I think he's just like amazing.
That book again is called The Procrastinator's Guide to Killing Yourself, Living When Life Feels Unlivable. And it's for anybody who thinks that maybe life might not be worth living, or for anybody who cares about someone who might feel this way. And you can get it wherever you get books, or you can download the audiobook version right now on Audible or Spotify. It costs like $5. That's cheaper than a soy latte. And you can listen to it while you're driving to work, or if you're jobless like me, you can listen to it while you're, I don't know, walking around the block for the 10th time today. Now, Victoria had another recommendation.
I think like Alan Watts has been like, when you think about more meditation, Alan Watts is a wonderful person to start to, I don't know, learn about and read his books because he's really like a pioneer for mindfulness meditation. And that one gets a bit more like spiritual side, so just being open to that as well.
Alan Watts was known as a philosophical entertainer who wrote several books, including The Wisdom of Insecurity, Become What You Are, and The Way of Zen. He really introduced the Western world to the Buddhist, Taoist, and Hindu philosophies. So he does get quite spiritual, but if you're into that, or even if you're not, consider reading something from Alan Watts.
And I think my recommendation is to read and learn from not just one modality or source. It's like, ooh, maybe I'm not the most maybe spiritual person, but read about it. Maybe, you know, I don't like sports, but read a book. Like there's another wonderful Joe Williams. He has this great book and he talks a lot about his suicide attempt, and he was an NRL player in Australia, and he's a First Nations man, and he's wonderful. So like, yeah, maybe you don't do sports, but reading his story is incredible. So I think like that's what's helped me the most is like, I'm not like picky on my sources. I'm like, I'm going to read all of it so I can form my own opinions.
It sounds like you're sort of open-minded to trying, you know, different things. Maybe watching a movie or a TV show that you wouldn't normally watch, just to get like a different perspective and be open to maybe there's more ways of thinking than just what I'm used to.
Yeah, exactly.
Very cool. What do you do in your spare time when you're not working? What do you do for fun?
Yeah, fair. Well, I take care of this little beeps. Charlotte is like a commitment, so do take care of her.
Yeah.
Like I said, I do a lot of yoga, and like Pilates is kind of my like, that's how I like to get my exercise in. I love my friends. So I have such a wonderful friend group here in Melbourne, and we do a lot of things. So that's been really fun since living here and kind of making those friends. Because when I first moved here, I didn't have any friends, and now I really appreciate them. But yeah, just lots of that. I love music. I love going to gigs. I love singing.
Nice. Sounds like something you alluded to before, getting creative. And embracing that side has probably helped you and would help many people find balance and live happily and healthily.
Yeah, and I think also like don't worry about being good at something, like being the best. Like we have such a weird kind of like capitalist feeling of like I can't be a singer because I'm not Beyonce, or like I can't do art because I'm not Picasso. It's like you can do art and music and anything creative, and you don't have to be the best at it. Like just do it anyway.
Just do it for yourself.
Yeah, and I think that's like, it's sometimes tough and tricky, but do it and put it out there. And I think that's like a really healthy thing.
Very cool. I've got a few listener questions here for you, if you are ready.
Yes, happy to take them.
But before that, each week here on Travelling Science, we make a donation to a charity of the guest's choosing. And this week, Victoria has chosen to donate to the Black Dog Institute, a medical research institute that is investigating mental health across all ages, with the aim of making a mentally healthier world for all of us. So a donation has been made to the Black Dog Institute on behalf of Victoria Lynne Carrier. And if you'd like to make a donation to them as well, to support mental health research, you can certainly do that. And if you'd like to support this podcast and the charities that we donate to every single week, you can certainly do that as well via Patreon, and that would be totally appreciated. Both of those links are in the show notes just down below, but for now, let's get back to Travelling Science. First question is from Natsuki and also Jamal. They want to know if you had any advice on how to stop sort of overthinking or ruminating on negative ideas.
That's a great question. And a tough one, because I think as humans, we do that so often. And we're also like the main character in our story, which like we forget sometimes. So almost every person, when you're in a room, they're all, overthinking something. And I think one of the best ways to start to think about that, because again, I can't give solutions for everyone, but is to kind of create more of like an observer mode. So what I mean by that is like, if you're overthinking this process and you're starting to get angry and you're like, I'm so angry about this thing, and I keep thinking,
you were like, oh, why do I feel awful right now?
Yeah.
Because your brain is just going.
It's going. I often say like taking an observer mode and saying, wait a second, I am feeling anger. I am thinking of this. So it's kind of labeling and naming what's going on for you. And the more we can do that, we start to do that more often. And like we start to create more of these neural pathways where we can say, no, I recognize I'm overthinking right now. So it's not like you're trying to fix every problem you have immediately, because it's not going to happen. But when I start to overthink, I'm like, I'm overthinking. I just name it. I call it out, call myself out. I'm like, you're overthinking right now. Like, this is in the future, Victoria. This is not happening right now. And then I think, what is happening right now? And you can do like the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 is one of my favorite mindfulness activities. And you can think about what are 5 things that I can see, 4 things that I can hear, 3 things that I can feel, 2 things that I can smell, 1 thing I can taste. And you just doing that, it sounds like silly, and you're like, of course I know what is around me. But the more we do that and practice that, we take ourselves back to the present moment. And even if it's just for a split second, we stop overthinking so much about what's happening or what's going to be in the future.
Getting in touch with your senses sounds like a great way to bring yourself back to the present moment and stop thinking about stuff that you have no control over. The next question is from Kimmy Nolan, who wanted to know, how do you talk to friends or family members who might be struggling with mental health or suicidality?
I think it can be like the trickiest when they're closest to us, because we love them so much. There's a lot more fear around it. Again, not a one size fits all for any of these, but it's that curiosity, compassion, and empathy. Those are like 3 things that if you can lead with that is going to make for a way, not smoother all the time, but a better connection with someone. So if you do have somebody who's struggling with it, sitting them down when they're comfortable. So not forcing someone to talk to you, not saying I care about you, so you have to tell me. Just being like, I care about you. I'd love to talk about it more. Whatever you have to say, I'm here for it. Like really assuring them that like nothing they're going to say is going to scare you off, and mean that. Really work on yourself, whatever you have to do before, mean that. So if they do say something that's quite scary or maybe, angry at you, you can listen and you can say, thank you for telling me that. I don't know what to say back. I just want you to know I'm here for you, and maybe we can try and figure it out together.
These discussions can be really challenging and difficult, and you might think that you can't do it, but you actually can. And I would challenge everybody to have these discussions, even if they are extremely uncomfortable. It's going to be okay. The conversation will be productive.
Yeah, I genuinely feel it's going to go somewhere, right? So maybe it won't be like incredible. Maybe the person will be like, I don't really want to talk about that right now. But you've showed them that they're not alone in it. And that's like one of the biggest things you want to make people feel. And again, not just make people feel because you're checking it off a list. This is for like, sometimes with people, they're like, I've done the thing. But like genuinely be there for someone or communicate. Like, I'm so busy in my life right now. I realize that I haven't been able to talk to you heaps. Let's carve out a time together because I want to talk to you. I want you to know that I'm here. I just do have all these other things going on. Or you can say, I also am struggling with a lot of things, and I see you struggling with a lot of things. I don't know if I can take on all of that, but let's find a place that will help you, or people, or a group, or, you can just be honest, being more honest, instead of just avoiding, because that's what people do. They typically,
most people
they're like, can't handle that, gonna avoid that.
And again, bringing that relatability as well. Sometimes it's easier to say, I don't know how you're feeling, but here's what's going on with me.
Yeah.
Let's discuss.
Yeah.
Could be a good way to do it. There you go, Kimmy. And last listener question is from Natsuki Footy Mason, who's wondering, I know you spoke about this before, as being a negative thing, but when should someone maybe go to the emergency room if they're a serious risk of doing something potentially life-threatening? Is the emergency room, is that somewhere where people might end up? Or?
I think when we often talk about this, I wouldn't have the emergency room as my first point of contact. There are wonderful programs popping up all over Melbourne, very specifically, called the Locals program. And these programs are trying to really step in that in-between. So somebody can get seen faster, and they're met with a peer support worker. So they're met with a human who's gonna sit and talk to them until they can be seen. Which is like, if you call, if somebody is at crisis point, which I hope that a lot of people, don't have to experience this, but if you are with somebody and they are going to, hurt themselves, I would say in those moments, it's so scary and you're not really thinking. Calling Lifeline is really great because they can just help you figure that out together. Like, don't feel like you have to do this alone. You can get them on the phone, say, I've got, somebody here with me.
Lifeline is a non-profit organisation that provides free 24-hour telephone crisis support service in Australia. And there are similar services in most countries around the world. You can quickly and easily find their number and call them at literally any time. And a professional will answer who can provide mental health and emotional support for you and your friends. But what else can you do when you're talking with somebody who is contemplating suicide?
And then being transparent with whoever you're with, asking like, I think we need to go to the hospital right now because I'm worried about you. Do you want me to drive you? Do you want the ambulance? Do you want the lights off? Do you want them on? Like, giving agency to the person. What we do often when we're scared is we take all the agency away and we say, you can't handle yourself, I'll handle you now, which is not what we want to do. We want to say, you are a person experiencing deep despair right now. I want to be there for you. I don't know what to do. I'm quite scared. I think the emergency room might be where I need to bring you. How do we do that together? It's the way we frame it. It's the way we talk about it. We don't want to just make someone feel like, I'm taking over now. You can't do this anymore. I'm taking over. That's where we want to try and shy away from, which is typically what happens,
So you want to be working with the person to help them as best you can, rather than trying to take control of the situation and taking agency away from them, because that can sometimes make things worse. Sounds like great advice. Thank you so much for answering those listener questions, Vic. And just to finish off this interview, I've got a quick lightning round if you're ready.
I'm ready.
All right. 6 questions, 60 seconds, and the timer starts now. You're from USA, now you're in Australia. Which is better?
Oh, Australia. Oh my God. Not even a doubt in my mind, Australia.
Oh, there you go. Everyone in USA. If you could do something completely different with your life, a completely different profession, what do you think you might do?
Ooh, I would, and like my alter ego, like I would love to be like an artist, like a singer in a band, like that is like the dream. I think that'd be sick.
Full creative.
Yeah, full creative mode.
What do you love most about your job?
Oh, the people, the humans I get to talk to, and the stories of hope that I get to listen to, and of strength and resilience. Like, it just, it fuels me, and it's so much out there, and I get to see so much of it, and I feel so privileged to be in the spaces where people can share their stories.
Awesome people. What do you hate most about your jobs?
I think what I hate most would be the funding and the way in which the mental health system has so many holes in it, and it's really devastating, and it's really tough to help someone and be like, but there's all these programs that might make this worse. And I think the funding of it all is really stressful because programs like ours can get cut even when we're doing amazing work. And that's so tough.
That's funny because the next question is, if you had, say, $1 million of funding,
yes,
where would you like to see that money put to sort of help people with these sorts of issues?
Ooh, great. I would put it into early prevention instead of postvention, which is what the government puts a lot of money in, because that's quantifiable. They're like, oh, we can see the postvention. We know where the money is going.
So I hadn't heard of this, but postvention is what happens after a death by suicide to support those bereaved or affected by the loss, helping them to cope with the situation. And a study in 2018 figured out that on average, there are 135 people who are directly impacted by a suicide. 135! So obviously postvention is important, but prevention is much more likely to reduce the risk of suicide, thereby protecting 136 people. So why don't they put more funding into suicide prevention?
Technically, if they give a lot of money in prevention, they don't know if it saved someone's life.
Okay.
It will. So I would put all of my money in early prevention and in the lived experience workforce and the peer workforce, 100%.
If you're feeling down, what's the first thing you go for to make you feel awesome again?
Ooh, I'd go for like a musical. I put on like a musical because I love that, and I sing at the top of my lungs. And I'm mostly crying when this happens, so I'll just be like sobbing in the living room, and it feels like I'm just getting it all out while I'm singing like Les Mis, like in my living room, and Charlotte's just watching me. That's my go-to. Or if I'm in the car, I'll do the same.
Yeah, just singing loud.
Yeah, singing and crying.
Lovely. Well, Vic, you're doing some incredible work. You really are saving lives and opening up the discussions that just need to be happening with more people all around the world, because it really does affect everyone in your work. So thank you so much for doing everything you do and for coming on the show today. Considering everything we've discussed here today, if you had one final piece of advice that you'd like to share with our listeners, maybe something that they can take home and apply to their own lives to live happier or healthier, what's your final piece of advice?
I think it would really be to start speaking up more and to start asking your friends and family how they're going, having more conversations around suicide, around mental health, around struggle, because it's normal. And I would say to start to really think about what's a coping mechanism in your life and what's restorative, and not beating yourself up about it. No judgment. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times we start that and then we judge ourselves and it's like, I am binge watching this. I am, going out every weekend. Don't judge yourself on it. Just start to label it and start to say, okay, this weekend, maybe I'll do something else that's more restorative. So I really think it's small changes. Doesn't have to be big changes. It's the small things we do for people, and it's the small things that we do for ourselves that I think make some of the biggest differences.
So there you have it, legends. That was Victoria Lynne Carrier sharing some valuable information all about suicide prevention. What an absolute roller coaster of a conversation. I mean, 1 minute we were talking about how she loves teaching mindfulness to senior citizens, and the next minute we're talking about how to ask your loved ones if they're contemplating suicide. But it's an important conversation to have, and so many people choose to avoid the conversation because it's uncomfortable or because they're afraid of what the answer might be. Well, Victoria's advice to you is to embrace the discomfort, embrace that fear, ask the question and have a discussion about it, because you could end up saving somebody's life. And if you're ever struggling with mental health issues or thoughts of suicide, there is support out there for you. There might be a peer group nearby that you could join, or you can speak with a therapist online, or if it's an emergency, you can call a suicide hotline to speak with somebody right now. And just by speaking with another human being and being heard, that can make a huge difference. If you want to learn more about NEAMI National, LifeConnect, and the training and workshops that they offer around suicide prevention, you can look them up, and the links are in the show notes just down below. And make sure you subscribe right here for more Traveling Science every single week, and follow Traveling Science on Instagram to see who we're interviewing next, and there you can send in your own listener questions. And finally, if you're more visually oriented, feel free to check out the Traveling Scientist YouTube channel. And if you stick around to the end of the episode, I always leave you with a little secret. And this week's secret is that this morning I was feeling a little bit down and a really good song came on. So I just decided to randomly start dancing with my dog. alley. And I just picked up her little schnauzer paws and started like stepping around the kitchen. She didn't really like that. So then I just picked her up and like span around in time with the music, and it felt really nice. And she was just kind of looking at me like, what the hell is happening here? But it made my morning way better. And I think I'm always going to have that random memory of the time that I was dancing around the kitchen with my dog. Anyway, that's all for today, legends. Thank you so much for listening in. And I'll catch you all next Science Sunday. Cheers.